Hi everyone, this is Hana. Happy New Year, everyone. Unfortunately, the beginning of New Year, we are not happy about things, what's going on right now around the world, right? Today, I would like to talk about Venezuela and US. As we know, in December 1989, when US President George H.W. Bush invaded Panama, the world was in shock. The United States labeled Manuel Noriega, the leader of Panama, not as a head of state, but as a drug trafficker. Using overwhelming military force, they launched an arrest operation. Noriega, who had taken refuge in the Vatican embassy, surrendered to the US military on January 3, 1990. 36 years later, on exactly the same day, January 3, 2026, US President Donald Trump dusted off that old script. The night sky of Caracas, Venezuela was torn apart by the flash of US bombers. President Maduro was tied up like baggage and loaded onto a US transport plane. At that moment, the thin safety net we knew as international law completely vanished. This is not just a simple military operation by a superpower claiming to be the world police. The United States is no longer even pretending to care about optics. It is a massive declaration. If we stand against America, we can invade your sovereign nation at any time. We are regressing to an era of barbarism where the logic of power is blatantly exposed. When a reporter asked President Trump about the meaning of this Venezuelan airstrike operation, he replied in his characteristically dry and brazen tone. We are in the oil business. To many other countries, we will be selling a tremendous amount of oil. He did not launch F-35 fighter jets for the freedom or human rights of the Venezuelan people. He simply executed the most powerful physical enforcement to transfer the ownership deed of the world's largest oil reserves to the United States. This is less of a war and more of a massive-scale hostile takeover, which is M&A. This is why the voice of some groups in Seoul, South Korea, who wave the American flag in the plaza and shout, "Please arrest our president too. Come to South Korea, USA. America will save us," sounds so sadly empty. Businessman Trump did not punish the Venezuelan dictator Maduro as a guardian of democracy, right? To him, ideological debates about dictatorship versus democracy or election fraud are just annoying shells that don't make any money. The only engine that moves him is profit, right? If the pro-Japanese fascist forces in Korea cannot offer him guaranteed cash, he will not even give them a glance. To Trump, the current South Korean government is actually much more profitable for him. Businessman Trump does not make deals where he loses money. He would rather make a deal with a strong dictator like Putin in Russia who has nuclear weapons than fight him. What we are witnessing now is not the victory of justice. It is the naked face of global business jungles ruled by selective justice. Right now, the person on earth who feels the most relief and simultaneously lets out a cold sneer watching the news of the US airstrike on Venezuela is probably Chairman Kim Jong-un in Pyongyang, North Korea. Yeah, he is our neighbor. To him, this event signifies the end of the nuclear uselessness theory and the perfect victory of the nuclear deterrence theory. Kim Jong-un remembers clearly how Gaddafi of Libya, whom his father Kim Jong-un watched closely, met a miserable end after giving up his nuclear weapons. And today he witnessed Maduro, who shouted anti-Americanism without nukes, being dragged away like luggage. The decisive difference between Trump showing off his bromance as a negotiator with Putin and launching bombers mercilessly at Maduro is exactly the process of the nuclear button. For Kim Jong-un, this airstrike solidified his old belief that nuclear weapons are the only life insurance into an absolute truth. The door to North Korea-US dialogue, which some might have hoped for after Trump's re-election, was ironically closed by Trump's own hand. Now North Korea will kick away the denuclearization negotiation table. They will cling even more fanatically to the miniaturization and diversification of nuclear warheads. Their threat: if the US tries to invade us like Venezuela, we will turn Seoul, Tokyo, and Guam into a sea of fire, has now become a practical rule of engagement for survivor, not just a simple rhetoric. With this, the peace clock on the Korean Peninsula has stopped. The missile Trump launched hit Caracas, but its fragments shattered the peace process on the Korean Peninsula. Caught between the US shouting peace through strength and North Korea believing in survivor through nukes, South Korea, we must act more cautiously and wisely than ever. Fate, playfully and cruelly, has placed South Korea in the middle of a sensitive situation at this moment of massive chaos. Because just the day after the US airstrikes on Venezuela, South Korean President Lee Jae-myung visited China as a state guest. It was a breathtaking irony of history that the leader of a US ally must propose a toast in the heart of China, the strongest supporter of the country the US just invaded, which is Venezuela. Washington will pressure the Korean government, express your support as an ally. Beijing will give a warning look, condemn this imperialist violence. This is the precarious existence of the Korean Peninsula squeezed between the violent games of superpowers. Koreans, we are historically quite familiar with this kind of thing. Fortunately, the current South Korean government is handling this diplomatically with great caution and care. What is even more chilling is the coordinated silence of the superpowers. Russia and China might raise their voices outwardly to criticize the US, but their insides are filled with relief. Since the US has set a precedent of removing another country's president under the pretext of national security and drug control, the moral justification to stop China from pressing Taiwan, Russia from ravaging Eastern Europe, or Israel from erasing Palestine has disappeared. A license of fear that allows superpowers to cook small nations as they please has been issued globally. Some people here in South Korea borrowed a ton of Western media like the New York Times or the Washington Post to spread a subtle both sides arguments. The violation of international law and procedural issues are regrettable, but the liberation of the Venezuelan people is welcome. Of course, history has tolerated illegal justice before. When Israel's Mossad violated Argentina's sovereignty to kidnap Nazi war criminal Eichmann in 1960, or when NATO bombed Serbia without UN approval in 1999 to stop ethnic cleansing. Humanity closed its eyes, saying humanitarian justice takes precedent over procedure illegality. The world is multidimensional and complex, right? But placing Trump's 2026 invasion of Venezuela on the same line as those events is an insult to history. The Eichmann kidnapping had the historical desperation of condemning the Holocaust. Kosovo had the humanitarian urgency of stopping genocide. However, there is no humanity or historical justice in Trump's bombers. They are filled only with the greedy cargo of oil and hegemony. Trump is stealing past examples of moral exceptions to use as wrapping paper for his robbery. The US airstrike on Venezuela reminds me of the shadow of occupation hidden behind the chill of liberation that covered the Korean Peninsula 80 years ago. This is why I'm talking about Venezuela. Many people think the 38th parallel was created after the Korean War, but the tragedy begins 5 years earlier in August 1945. When World War II ended and Japan surrendered, the US and the Soviet Union needed to disarm the Japanese troops in Korean Peninsula. For their convenience, they made a hasty promise. The Soviet takes the north and the US takes the south, based on 38th parallel. Do you know how that line was drawn? Two American officers opened a National Geographic map, and in just 30 minutes, they drew a straight line across the peninsula. 30 minutes. That is all it took to divide a nation that had been one for thousands of years. And then on September 7th, 1945, General MacArthur announced Proclamation Number 1. By virtue of the authority vested in me as Commander-in-Chief, I assume for the purpose of military control all authority over the territory of Korea south of 38 degrees north latitude. The first sentence was clear. The US military defined themselves not as a liberation army here to save us, but as an occupation army here to take over the territory. Their goal was not the immediate independence of Korea, but stable management to check the Soviet Union. Under the pretext of administrative efficiency, the US kept the Japanese officers of the Governor General of Korea and pro-Japanese collaborators in their positions. They might ask, we got rid of your dictator, Japan, and liberated you. Aren't you grateful? But in return, we were deprived of the opportunity to establish an independent government, and we had to suffer through bloody conflicts between the surviving pro-Japanese vested interests and nationalist forces. What is happening in Venezuela now is a tragic reenactment of the Korean Peninsula in 1945. Just as the US military government did not recognize our own Committee for the Preparation of Korean Independence, or the Provisional Government, the US will not listen to the voices of the Venezuelan people. For smooth oil supply, if it aligns with the US interest, they will gladly hold hands with the corrupt officials of the Maduro regime or opportunistic elites. What worries me most is what comes after. The streets of Venezuela are now divided into pro-American factions saying, "Thank you for removing the dictator," and anti-American factions saying, "We cannot become a colony of America." This resembles our sad self-portrait in the liberation space, where we were divided into pro-trusteeship versus anti-trusteeship, left versus right, killing each other. At the end of that division, we went through the Korean War, and for over 70 years, we have lived with our waist cut in half, divided into north and south. But in that pitch black darkness, we learned one painful lesson. The fact that it was never the United States that ended the long dictatorship and military regimes born from the incomplete liberation thrown by foreign powers. It was us, the citizens, Korean citizens, crossing the immense river of blood from the April 19 revolution in 1960, the May 18 Gwangju democratization movement in 1980, and the June struggles in 1987, Korean citizens dragged down the dictators with our own hands. The power that allows South Korea to never give up its sovereignty, despite groaning under internal contradictions and social conflicts, comes from here. It is because we refuse the free lunch offered by the empire and set our own rear table with our blood and sweat. Democracy brought by others collapses like sandcastles. We learned that. But democracy won by oneself is never uprooted by any stone. We must also look back at ourselves, consuming war like a spectacular game. Watching smart bombs exploded like a firework on smartphone screens, we have become numb to murder and violence. The casualties from the US surprise airstrike on Venezuela are over 80 now, including civilians. And the number is still rising as we speak. We need to recall the conversation scene between Elizabeth and Victor Frankenstein in Guillermo del Toro's movie Frankenstein. In the film, Elizabeth says this to Victor: "Well, honor, country, bravery. Surely those are valuable and noble ideologies in themselves, aren't they? But because of those very ideologies, people are dying in ways that are never noble, with their faces stuck in the mud, vomiting blood, screaming in agony. Those who were someone's father, brother, or son, whom mothers fed, washed, cared for, taught, and sent out into this world with their own hands, just to fall on a foreign battlefield far away from those who fueled this tragedy. The people who actually created the war are comfortable at home, without a drop of blood on them, never even grazed by bayonet, with bodies without a single scratch. They are under warm, clean blankets. That is what happens when idiots chase ideologies. Someone's son and brothers are dying with their faces in the mud for the benefit of another country. But the people who fueled this tragedy are wearing white shirts without a drop of blood and shiny ties, staying under warm and clean blankets in Washington. They drink brandy, smoke cigars, and discuss democracy and justice. Those who order war are safe, and those who suffer war are always innocent citizens. We must not get used to this sin. We must not stand by as a powerful country breaks into a powerless country under the name of mechanical neutrality. We must not become numb to people dying. American citizens also have a responsibility. This is what the leader they chose has done. In a democracy, citizens bear joint responsibility for the exercise of power, and we, who remain silent, are the same. The price of closing our eyes to the pain of others will surely return one day. No one can be free from this immense karma. Venezuela, please survive. And remember, the empire never gives a free lunch. Behind the ideologies of power holders pretending to be noble, there is always the stench of blood from the common people stuck in the mud. I earnestly pray as a citizen of a divided nation on the other side of the globe, that your liberation will not be ruined by others' hands like ours was. That even in that chaos, you will eventually stand up with your own hands. Thank you so much for listening to my story. If any part of my story resonates with you, please hit the like button, subscribe to my channel. And if you have any questions about me or life in Korea, let me know in the comments down below. Welcome to Hana's Island. You're safe here now. I'll see you soon. Take care. Bye.